Focus EU DAC6. How will this affect the gaming operators across Europe?
Thank you for joining us for this panel. Today we'll be speaking about DAC6. DAC6 is a relatively new law, which requires reporting. So it is an additional obligation on practitioners, on lawyers, accountants, and also other service providers, as well as the taxpayers themselves, to disclose any structures that they set up for their businesses. Now, sometimes structures are not even tax-driven, but this new law requires us to report to the inland revenue of the country where there is the close connection, where there are tax benefits as a result of this restructuring, or where, for example, a client comes to us and for other reasons other than tax decides to set up in one country and not in another. For example, for non-disclosure purposes. Now, with this new law, we have this obligation to pass on all information that we have on our clients, or for the taxpayers themselves in certain cases, as we shall see, to give this information to the revenue. So the revenue, they already have all this data on file on our clients, just in case if there is ever any investigation. Together with me today, I have three panelists. I have Ceri Stoner from Wiggin. She's a partner, tax partner in Wiggin in the UK. I have Daniel Lipman from Israel. He's also a tax partner there, and we'll be discussing how Israel, although it's not part of DAC6, what are the effects on their clients. And we have a very good representation from the industry. I have Cristian, who is the head of tax of Superbet. So thank you for joining me today. And I will start with Ceri. I wanted to ask you, Ceri, in the UK, you had something similar, right? So before all this DAC6 regulation came into force in Europe, the UK had something similar where tax practitioners had the obligation to report tax structuring or some corporate structuring to the HMRC. Now we have this, which is being implemented at EU level. What are the similarities and how are you tackling this with clients?
Yeah, that's right, Ramona. We've got something very similar already, or at least a foundation that's similar in terms of our disclosure of tax avoidance schemes, the DOTIS rules in the UK. We've already had this for a number of years, and that has required the reporting of certain structures to the UK tax authorities. Now, DAC6 will be in addition to this, but many of the hallmarks of DAC6 that basically are the triggers that require people, payers and advisors to report this to the UK authorities are very similar. The DAC6 rules are broader, however, and a key difference here is that many more intermediaries are expecting to have reporting requirements. In both cases, the rules are complex, and amongst our clients, we've seen one of the main challenges has just been to put in place a process and a structure that identifies those arrangements that do come within the rules. And that's really key, I think, at the moment for people looking to comply with DAC6, is just to make sure that you've got the right people or the right technical know-how advising you on what is potentially reportable. There's also a difference of opinions within the market and also sometimes amongst advisors when we look at the existing rules in the UK. So it's really key as you look at what arrangements you might need to report for DAC6, just to be on notice that until there is a clear market practice here and some sort of consensus on a European level, there are going to be divergences of opinion in terms of what needs to be reported. And so it's really important to be on top of what you are reporting to tax authorities, so there's a consistent reporting on your different arrangements in different jurisdictions.
Do you already have guidelines implemented in the UK? Because we know that there is the main body of legislation, but now all of the member states are themselves issuing guidelines and interpretations of the hallmarks on the legal privilege, for example. We know that in some countries, lawyers and accountants, they can exercise their legal privilege and not disclose these structures. So how is the situation in the UK? Is it, do you have the regulations and the guidelines already? What's the situation?
We do. I mean, obviously, these rules look at historic transactions from June 2018. There's a reporting obligation on any arrangements that have a reporting trigger since that time. We've only had guidelines much more recently than that. So for a long time during the reporting period, there has been a sense of working in the dark. We do now have legislation in force in the UK, and the guidelines from our tax authorities have been published. They are relatively high level at the moment, and we expect to see more detail as time passes. There is some guidance from the tax authorities in respect of legal privilege. As you say, as lawyers, when we are advising, we may not need to report ourselves on a particular arrangement, but there may be a requirement for us to put our clients on notice that we think there's potentially a reportable arrangement that they are party to, and therefore they can waive their legal professional privilege and we can report, or they can choose to report themselves or have an accountant's report instead. So there's a range of options open to the client, but in many cases, lawyers are protected by legal professional privilege. In the UK, it's been primarily the Law Society that's looked in detail, understandably, at these rules and how they would work. So again, that doesn't have sort of legal reliance per se, but obviously it's something as lawyers we can be pretty certain would be widely accepted.
Okay, and what about penalties? What are the penalties in the UK? Briefly, because we're running out of time. So what are the penalties in the UK for non-reporting, both at the level of the taxpayer and the level of the practitioners?
Yeah, the reporting penalties are the same, and it's £5,000 as a sort of the standard penalty. There's also sort of an option on part of HMRC to apply to the tax tribunal to have an additional daily penalty applied, and that's £600 a day, so that can quickly mount up, as you might imagine. And there's a discretionary penalty up to £1 million. Now, these discretionary penalties are dependent on how serious the incident is. So I suppose you're looking at perhaps repeat offenders, or where there's a degree of deliberate non-reporting, as opposed to just people getting on, learning how to handle these regulations. But to a certain extent, we expect HMRC to be more lenient at the beginning, and typically ratchet up how closely they look at transactions as time passes, and people should know when they need to report and not.
Okay. Daniel, what about you? I mean, you're in a different situation because Israel is not part of this DAC6, but you have clients, many gaming companies, which are based in Europe, and you structure for them. You do all the structuring, also with collaboration with other EU practitioners, and you come up with structures for them. So how is the situation? Because you're creating the work and then you leave it to other practitioners to report it. How are you tackling this?
Yeah, Ramona, you're right. Herzog Neeman is an Israeli law firm, and we don't have any presence in Europe, so DAC6 at least doesn't directly apply to us. Similarly, our clients, whilst Israeli entrepreneurs are very active in the gaming space because of the legal position in Israel, Israeli companies are not involved. They generally are set up using a Gibraltar company or a Malta company or Isle of Man or another commonly used gaming jurisdiction for legal purposes. It makes it very tricky in terms of the new DAC6 obligations. So our clients will need to be very aware of the obligations, and we'll also have the additional challenge, as you say, of making sure that someone is reporting this, because if no advisor is involved in reporting, then the obligation can fall back on the company itself, and the clients need to be aware of that. As you mentioned, we are very active in assisting our clients with structuring. We will always work with qualified lawyers and accountants and tax advisors in the relevant jurisdictions, but as is the nature of dealing with clients, we will have discussions with clients around their structures, and not always will there be a European lawyer, accountant, tax advisor who will see the entire picture. So it's very important that that our clients and other clients who do have some presence in Europe, but don't necessarily have a European lawyer, accountant, tax advisor who they work with on all of their structuring needs, to look at their overall structure, look at transactions and arrangements which were in place since 2018, consider the broadly defined hallmarks, which are, I must say, quite vague, quite confusing. In many cases, there are legitimate uses of structures which are commonly implemented, which a client might say, I'm not evading taxes here. I'm not using this in order to even save on tax. I'm doing it because whatever it is, search engine optimization, acceptable VAT planning, other factors which the client may say this is a perfectly legitimate use. What is there to report? And the answer is that under DAC6 there is potentially a reporting obligation. It needs to be analysed. We need to look back at your structures and at your transactions that have taken place since the relevant date and consider whether first of all whether a reporting is required, and then who is going to report it. And we'll work with clients in terms of figuring out who is the most appropriate advisor in order to make sure that the transaction is duly reported by someone, and not by no one, so that the company itself is not exposed.
What's your experience with the clients? How are they taking this reporting? Are they worried that there's this new obligation, or?
I think they're looking at it as another compliance requirement. The clients are used to additional, further and further compliance requirements being imposed, particularly in Europe. I think they're seeing it as another one in a long string of compliance requirements, which they're required to take on by virtue of having chosen to establish a place of business in Europe. I think it's a difficult one, though, to comply with because of the vagueness and the broadness of the tests, because it's not a clear one-to-one situation where you do A, you must do B. There's a lot more judgment involved, which makes it more challenging for clients to ensure that they're being compliant.
But at the end of the day, we have to reassure the clients. I mean, all the structures that we create are all in terms of law, right? So even though the tax authorities would know about it, for example, in Malta, if you had to look at the structures, there's transparency from a business register point of view. So if you had to combine together the structure, it's there. Okay, agreements, and maybe it's not clear, but what we're doing and how we assist our clients, it's all in terms of law. So I think even though there's this additional compliance obligation, right, we're passing on to our clients, at the end of the day, I mean, HMRC in the UK or all the tax authorities in Europe, they're looking at structures which are compliant with the law. So I think that's...
And I think the important point here is that, particularly in the gaming space, we have a lot of different factors which are competing at the same time and are relevant to our clients. It's not just tax. Clients will often create structures, or we'll assist clients with structures where the tax is not the driver, regulation is the driver, or the legality, or even it can be as simple as I mentioned before, search engine optimization. You can have structures in order to create a particular situation with in terms of Google's rules, which are these soft regulations of the platforms, whether it be Google or Facebook, and to comply with their requirements. So often our clients will be looking at the bigger picture, and we'll be assisting them look at the bigger picture, which will not only involve tax.
Correct. Cristian, what about you? So you have companies all over, not just in one place. So you have companies in different countries. How are you looking at this new additional obligation to report, and how do you plan to do it? So as Daniel was mentioning, practitioners in different countries would know their part of the structure, but they won't have a bigger picture. So in your case, do you think it's better if the company itself reports with the assistance of the practitioners, or you're relying on the intermediaries? What's your take on this?
First of all, thank you, Ramona, for the question and also for the invitation in that panel. As you mentioned, Superbet, it's an European gaming group, and we are operating in several European countries. And for sure, it's not a pleasure for us to have one additional obligation to report. That it's certain. If I'm adding to that the following, that the late implementation of the European directive in the national legislation. If I'm adding also the different implementation, in the sense that in some countries the local law it's exceeding the EU regulation, in the sense that they are referring also the indirect taxes, even the directive it's clearly mentioning only the direct taxes.
This is a very important point. So for example, in Malta and most of the European countries, when we're talking about DAC6, we're referring to income tax. We're not referring to VAT structures.
Yes, you are right.
But you're mentioning that other countries.
In Poland, for example, they have included in the national law also some references to the VAT, and there we have the obligation to report some structures, even they are not referring to the corporate income tax and clearly referring the VAT. That specific things. In addition to that, the directive, it was issued in 2018, and we need to report now in 2021 a very long period of time. And is it clear when we have performed the transaction, nobody was thinking to that during the past, and we need to start to dig into the past and to start to have a deep analysis, as Daniel mentioned. Even not the tax, it was the driver for the structure, because mainly in our industry the regulation are the main driver. At the beginning you have mentioned the lack of guidance. I will say we are speaking about the missing of the guidelines, because are countries where we are operating and they does not have any kind of guidelines in relation with that. Daniel mentioned earlier the fact that the hallmarks are very vague and also very theoretical, and he is totally right. It's quite difficult to analyze the transactions using these hallmarks, and due to that it's very helpful to have the guidelines with clearly examples, what should be done by taxpayer, by the contributors, in order to properly assess the transaction. At the end, I will mention the fines and the penalties, because in general, in majority of the countries where we are operating, the level of the fines and penalties, it's quite similar with the directive. But again, are some countries where it's not exactly like that, and I will refer again to Poland, but it's a specific case, because if you do not report, if you are not compliant with the local law requirements, the fines are quite significant. For some cases, you should pay, if you are not compliant, millions of zloty, and that means for sure a few thousands euros. So it's a significant aspect, and that for sure should be considered when we are analyzing the transaction and we are deciding if that should be reported or not. Because it's one thing to not report and to pay 5,000 euro, and it's another discussion if you are not reporting but you should pay 500,000 euro. It's a totally different. And I will switch after that short introduction to your question. What we will do, how we will work in relation with the DAC6. First of all, as Daniel mentioned earlier, we need to be sure that we are reporting everything and we are not missing everything. Secondly, I have started the discussions with the intermediaries, and in the majority of the countries where we are present, they will use the privilege, in the sense that they will not take the responsibility to report, and it's on our side the obligation to report in accordance with the DAC6 directive. I will add at the end the fact that I think it's better to have in-house the report just to be sure that first of all, we are reporting the transaction, and first of all, we are consistent in the sense that most probably the transactions what should be reported under the European directive are intercompany transactions, and due to that I think it's better to have the control of these reports in both jurisdictions, because being an intercompany transaction, I need to report in both countries, because it's not mentioned anywhere the fact that if I'm reporting in one country and it's an intercompany transaction, I am exonerated in the other one. So to conclude, we'll be on our side, but obviously will not be an easy exercise to be performed, and it is a real challenge.
Okay, so we said that it's a very complex discussion and we can't obviously shrink it in 20 minutes, but I think the takeaway from this panel is that practitioners and also people in the industry, they need to have processes in place, and they have to decide who's going to report. Is it the practitioners or themselves? Most likely it would be on the taxpayer themselves, because they would have the bigger picture, but then they rope in the practitioners from the different countries to help them with the actual reporting. So I hope that with this panel we brought a bit more of awareness of what's happening and this new obligation that we have, and we thank you all for following. Thank you for assisting the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramona.
Thank you, Ramona.